My parents kicked me out of the house right after I won $18 million in the lottery. My parents didn't know. Hey, I'm Isadora. Subscribe to our channel and watch until the end, because this story doesn't end the way you think. I don't remember what started the fight that morning. Maybe it was the dishes in the sink, or the way I breathed. In that house, anything could be a spark if it came from me. I was 26, living in the same room I had since I was 10, surrounded by childhood posters and adult disappointments. My mother said I was wasting my life. My father said I was taking advantage. My brother, of course, said nothing. He just stood in the hallway, smirking like he always did when I got dragged into another storm I didn't start. My dad's voice boomed through the walls like it had so many times before. You think you're special just because you doodle and dream? Grow up, Isadora. You've had enough chances. I didn't even try to defend myself this time. What would have been the point? I'd been carrying this same argument since I was old enough to know the word artist. I didn't need a reminder that I was the disappointment. They'd been kind enough to engrave that into my skin over the years. What none of them knew, what made this moment feel so different, was what I had hidden in the pocket of my hoodie. A lottery ticket, folded into quarters, slightly worn from the night. I couldn't stop holding it. I had checked the numbers at least 20 times. $18 million. 18 million. It felt unreal, surreal, until my bank appointment confirmed it that very morning. The money was real. I was rich. And still they threw me out like garbage. I walked upstairs slowly, not to argue, not to plead, but to pack. I grabbed the blue suitcase from under my bed, the one with the broken zipper I never fixed. My clothes, my sketchbooks, my laptop. Nothing sentimental. I didn't want anything from that place. The only photo I kept was the one of me and my grandmother, the only person who ever looked at me like I was enough. My hands shook as I zipped it closed. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was still, like the quiet before an earthquake. My mother stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms folded, watching me descend like I was something foul that had crawled out of the basement. My father opened the door, didn't even help with the bag, just said, "Don't come back until you grow up." My brother leaned on the frame, phone in hand. "You'll be back by next week," he said with a half laugh. I didn't answer, not because I had nothing to say, but because they didn't deserve to hear the truth. Outside, the air was cold, sharp. The sun was hiding behind thick clouds, and everything looked gray-fitting. I walked down the driveway slowly, like I was watching a version of myself leave. The one that used to cry after these fights. The one that used to believe they'd change. That girl stayed behind the door they just slammed. I was no longer her. I was the woman carrying $18 million and finally, holding the pen to write my own story. They had no idea what I carried. Not just the money, but the freedom it represented. The possibility of a life where I didn't have to explain my dreams or defend my worth. A life without their rules, their condescension, their disappointment. I didn't need revenge. Not yet. What I needed was air, space, time to feel something other than survival, and maybe a place of my own. A place where no one told me how to exist. I checked into a hotel 2 towns over using a fake name. Didn't want questions. Didn't want to be found. I stared at the ceiling that night, barely able to process it all. Kicked out by my own family in the morning. Millionaire by afternoon. A life ending and another beginning in the same 24 hours. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part just wanted to sleep for the first time in years without hearing their voices in my head. I didn't text anyone. Didn't tell Jessica, my best friend. Didn't post anything. The money felt like a secret too powerful to say out loud. I just stared out the hotel window, watching headlights pass in the rain, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Silence. Not just around me. Inside me. A silence not born of fear, but of possibility. Of choosing not to explain. Not to justify. Just disappear. They thought I'd crawl back, that I'd beg for another chance, that I'd apologize for being myself. What they didn't know, what they never imagined, was that I'd already won. Not just the lottery, but my way out. And this time, I wouldn't be knocking on their door again. This time, I'd be the one watching from across the street. I didn't go back to that street out of nostalgia. I went back to see if it still had power over me. 1 week after they threw me out, I parked a few blocks away and walked past the old house. Their house. Nothing had changed. Same chip shutters, same potted plants, same silence behind the curtains. But something across the street caught my eye. A white colonial, larger, quieter, with a small "for sale" sign barely visible in the lawn. I remembered that house. Mr. Collins had lived there. Alone, private. He'd passed away months earlier. Now it stood empty, untouched. And waiting. Something inside me clicked. I called a lawyer that same night. Not a realtor, an attorney. I didn't want this traced back to me. I created a holding company with a generic name. I moved money into it. By Monday morning, I made a cash offer. No contingencies. No delays. I told them I wanted it fast. Quiet. No signs. No paperwork on the lawn. The seller didn't ask questions. When you speak in dollars, people listen. Within 72 hours, the house was mine. Not just a home. A message. I never told anyone. Not even Jessica. It felt like a secret too heavy to say out loud. Like if I spoke it, it would lose its power. I changed the locks the same day I got the keys. Walked through each room in silence. It smelled like old books and dust. I didn't care. I stood by the window, looked across the street, and saw the porch where I used to stand and beg to be heard. I wasn't begging anymore. I wasn't knocking. I had a front row seat now, and they didn't even know. The sold sign vanished overnight. No moving trucks yet. No activity. My parents noticed. Of course they did. My mother stood on the porch the next morning, frowning at the window. She whispered something to my father. He shrugged, disinterested. But I know her well enough to recognize the expression. Suspicion. Curiosity. And underneath it, fear. They didn't like things they couldn't control. And this was completely out of their reach. A week later, the trucks arrived. Not flashy ones. Just efficient, fast. Furniture. Appliances. Curtains. A few pieces of artwork in black frames. Everything I'd chosen myself. Modern. Clean. Nothing like their crowded, dated home. I stayed out of sight. Directed everything through a private manager. They never saw me. Just shadows behind the tinted windows. They watched. Whispered. Wondered. But they didn't dare cross the street. Pride is funny like that. At night, I would sit in the living room with the lights off and watch their house. I knew the patterns by heart. When my father turned off the porch light. When my mother peeked through the blinds. When my brother's car came home late from whatever useless venture he was pretending was a business. I watched them the way they used to watch me, judging, assuming. But I didn't feel hate. Not exactly. I felt distance. And power. I chose not to make noise. No housewarming. No introductions. I let the silence grow heavy. I wanted them to feel the absence, not of me, but of their grip. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to prove anything. The address alone was enough. Every time they stepped out of their house, they saw mine. Every time they pulled out of the driveway, they passed the door they didn't know I owned. And that was enough. For now. I started remodeling slowly. Painted the kitchen. Refinished the floors. Turned the back room into a studio. There was peace in every change. Like erasing their voices one coat at a time. I'd put music on low, something soft, instrumental, and just work. My hands building something for once that wasn't going to be criticized or picked apart. Just mine. Just quiet. I didn't know what I was creating yet. But I knew it wasn't a hiding place. It was a beginning. Sometimes I'd see my mother gardening out front, glancing over nervously. Once, she waved at a neighbor and nodded toward my house. I saw the curiosity eating at her. I wondered if she dreamed up stories at night. Who had moved in? Why the curtains stayed drawn? Why the security lights were installed, but no one seemed to live there? The unknown scared her more than my failure ever did. She couldn't label me anymore, and that unsettled her deeply. I didn't laugh. I didn't celebrate. Not out loud. But every evening, as I stood behind the curtain, sipping tea and watching them from across the street, I felt something return. Something small. Something I'd lost long ago in that house. Control. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was stillness. Power in the quiet. A war without a single word spoken. And they didn't even know who they were losing to. I waited 6 months before opening the store. Not out of fear, out of strategy. I didn't want to look impulsive. I wanted it to feel inevitable. The space had been a failing laundromat, wedged between a closed bakery and my parents' hardware store. No one ever paid attention to that block, until the construction started. Fresh paint, new windows, a soft green sign with gold lettering, Astor. No last name, no explanation, just that, clean, elegant, curious, and close enough to send a message, without saying a word. From the beginning, I knew exactly what I wanted. A lifestyle boutique with paper goods, handmade crafts, art supplies, and a small cafe in the back. Warm lighting, community events, a space that felt like breathing. The grand opening was quiet, no parade. But people came. Curious neighbors, moms with strollers, students from the local art school. And slowly word spread. There's something different about that shop, they said. It feels like it has soul. Meanwhile, across the sidewalk, the energy shifted. My parents' store had always survived on loyalty. Familiar faces, routine customers. But suddenly, people weren't as loyal. Some crossed the street. Others peeked through my windows and smiled. My mother noticed first. Her glances turned sharper. My father made comments under his breath to anyone who'd listen. Trendy doesn't last. She won't survive winter. They didn't know they were fueling the fire. I made sure everything was perfect. Customer service, packaging, scent. I knew what they never understood. People don't buy things. They buy how you make them feel. And I made them feel seen, valued, free to linger, talk, laugh. We hosted a poetry night in the first month, a watercolor class the next. The community responded. The revenue grew. I reinvested every dollar, not because I needed to, but because I wanted that place to stand on its own. Inside, I kept my distance. I never spoke of my family, never let the bitterness leak into the walls. But it was there underneath it all, like a quiet current. Every satisfied customer, every sold-out weekend, every smiling child at our craft table, each one felt like reclaiming a piece of me that had been stolen. My store was becoming what I had needed when I was younger, a place where you didn't have to explain who you were to be welcome. There were rumors, of course. People loved stories. Some said I was an investor from the city. Others guessed I was related to someone rich. No one suspected the truth. My last name never appeared on the receipts. I trained my staff to call me just Izzy. I let the mystery live. The less they knew, the more powerful it became. Even my parents seemed unsure. My mother asked around carefully. My father pretended not to care, but I saw the way they watched. The tension across the sidewalk was thick, like invisible wire. Sometimes, our deliveries arrived at the same time. I'd nod politely. My father would look through me. One afternoon, my mother actually walked into Astor. She didn't recognize me at first. My hair was shorter, my posture different. She walked through like a stranger, bought a candle, said nothing. Only at the door did she pause, turning slightly as if she wanted to say something, then left. I stood there a long time after she was gone. My staff asked if I was okay. I smiled and said I was, but something in my chest had shifted, a crack where the rage used to live. Not gone, just less sharp. I didn't know if it was pride or grief. Maybe both. I had everything I ever wanted, and yet it didn't feel like a victory. Not really. It felt more like a wound that finally stopped bleeding, but still ached in the cold. Still, the store thrived. In under a year, we were featured in the city's Small Business Review. By the second year, we had a wait list for workshops and a growing online presence. The numbers didn't lie. We were growing. They were fading, but I never gloated. I didn't need to. The silence across the street said everything. Their window displays grew dustier, fewer cars parked out front, and I kept showing up, smiling, growing, healing quietly. Some days, I caught myself staring across the street, wondering if they knew, wondering if they remembered what they said the day they threw me out. You'll never make it on your own. I didn't need an apology. Not anymore. I just needed space to breathe. And I had created that space from nothing. From pain. From being unwanted. That was the power they never counted on. The kind of power you don't announce. The kind you build in silence, until it echoes through the walls they once used to shut you out. 2 years. That's how long it had been since I walked out of their house with a suitcase and a secret. And now, Astor wasn't just a shop, it was a landmark. People drove in from neighboring towns just to buy our handmade journals and lavender-scented candles. We were on the local radio every month. A regional magazine called us the heart of the block. A heart that beat quietly, steadily, just across the street from the people who once said I had none. My store was full of color and laughter. Theirs had turned gray, their windows dim, displays dusty. The parking spots in front of their hardware store stayed empty longer now. I heard whispers about debt, about unpaid suppliers, about arguments behind closed doors. I didn't seek those updates. They just came through customers, delivery drivers, old neighbors. My brother had burned through another business idea. My mother no longer smiled at the register. My father talked to himself when no one was there. And yet, not once did they cross the street. Not once did they knock. Not to ask. Not to accuse. Not to apologize. It was like an invisible wall still stood between us. Thicker now than when I lived in their attic. They knew. Of course they knew. You don't watch someone every day for 2 years and not figure it out. But they chose silence, stubbornness, pride. And so did I. Because winning in silence hurt less than opening old wounds. But at night, the silence was heavier. My bed was big, warm mine, and still cold in ways I couldn't explain. I had everything. Everything they said I couldn't have. Everything they said I didn't deserve. And yet, some nights I would lie awake, wondering why it didn't feel better. Why the victory still tasted like something scorched. Like I had won, but lost something in the process. Something I couldn't name. I'd walk through the store after closing, lights dimmed, music still playing low. I'd run my hands over the shelves, the counters, the notes customers left in our little gratitude jar. This place makes me feel seen. I come here when I've had a bad day. Thank you for creating this. And I'd smile, because I knew what it meant to not be seen, to be erased. But still, under it all was a dull ache, like a song playing in the background that you couldn't quite shut off. I never told anyone how close I lived to the pain. My team didn't know the full story. My customers just thought I was from somewhere else. And maybe I was now. Somewhere between who I used to be and who I was pretending to be. I wasn't lying exactly, but I wasn't free either. I had built my new life on top of the ashes of the old one. And some nights, the smoke still crept under the door. I tried to convince myself that their silence was enough, that them watching me rise while they sank was justice. But justice isn't the same as peace. And I didn't feel peaceful. I felt tired, like I had been carrying a suitcase inside me for 2 years, one filled with memories I never unpacked. I'd see my mother leaving work with red eyes, my father slamming the door behind him, my brother pretending not to notice me at the cafe. And every time I'd feel something shift inside. Not anger, not pity, just wait. One night I saw them all at once, standing outside their store, arguing quietly. My mother wiped her face, My father paced. My brother kicked the curb. And I stood behind the curtain, holding my tea, heart racing for no reason at all. I didn't want to be part of that scene, but I couldn't look away either, because no matter how far I had come, I still lived across the street from the place that broke me. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen counter until sunrise, staring at the wall. Not planning, not plotting, just thinking about what I'd built, about what I'd buried, about what still lived under all that success. Maybe I had won, but I hadn't healed. And winning without healing is just another kind of prison. A beautiful one, decorated in success and admiration, but a prison still. I realized something that morning. I had proven everything I wanted to prove, but I hadn't let go. Not really. I was still waiting for something. For them to say sorry. For them to recognize me. For closure that would never come. And I didn't want to keep waiting. I wanted my nights back. I wanted my mind quiet again. Not just my store. Not just my street. I wanted peace. Victory has a taste. People think it's sweet. Sharp. Satisfying. But for me, it started to taste like metal. Cold. Heavy. Bitter at the edges. My store was thriving. My name was whispered with admiration. My bank account grew every month. And yet, every time I turned the key in my front door, I felt it. That ache. That silence. The house I bought to send a message had become a museum of resentment. Every room a shrine to what I didn't say, to what they didn't hear. I used to wake up energized by revenge. The thought of them watching me succeed was fuel. But slowly it became something else. A weight. A fatigue that sleep couldn't cure. I'd go through the motions, staff meetings, event planning, invoices, but the spark that once lit every candle I sold was flickering. I began avoiding the window at night, avoiding the sidewalk where I might see them, avoiding, more than anything, the feeling that this life I built still had their shadows stretched across it. One Sunday, I sat on the porch alone. No phone, no music. Just the late afternoon sun and the sound of a wind chime in the distance. I looked at my house, the one across the street itself, and I realized something quietly devastating. I hadn't moved on. Not really. I had changed addresses, changed incomes, changed everything on the outside, but emotionally, I was still in that attic room, still waiting to be seen, still trying to prove I was worth keeping. That realization knocked the air out of me. Not with drama, not with tears, just silence, the kind that settles in your chest and stays there. I thought about all the energy I had spent building walls to keep them out. I had never stopped to ask if I had also locked myself in. My anger had been armor, my success a weapon, but neither had brought me peace. I was tired of carrying a sword in a world that no longer had battlefield. The next day, I looked up therapists. Quietly, privately. I didn't want to explain anything to anyone, not even Jessica. I booked an appointment under my middle name. It felt like a betrayal at first, like asking for help meant admitting weakness. But when I sat in that softly lit office and the woman across from me asked, "What brought you here today?" something in me cracked. For the first time in years, I didn't perform. I didn't defend. I just spoke. I told her everything. Not all at once, but enough. About the fight, the ticket, the house, the store, the silence, the rage. About how I thought success would heal me and how it hadn't. She didn't interrupt. Didn't take notes like I was a case file. She listened the way no one in my family ever had. No comparisons. No corrections. Just presence. And in that space, something unfamiliar happened. I began to unravel, not in pieces, but in layers. Week after week, we peeled back the story. Not just what they did, but how I had carried it. How I had worn their voices like a second skin. How I had confused proving them wrong with becoming myself. There were moments I hated her for what she made me see. For the truth that anger had become my identity. That I didn't know who I was without the war. But even in the discomfort, I kept going. because part of me, deep down, wanted to know who I could be without the weight. I started noticing the changes in small things. I stopped checking the store numbers every hour. I started leaving my phone in the other room at night. I lit candles for no one but myself. I reread books I loved as a teenager when I still believed life could be beautiful. I sketched again, not for product lines, for me. And one evening, I stood in my studio, paint on my hands, and felt something so foreign I didn't recognize it at first. Calm. Not happiness, but stillness. That week, I walked past my parents' store on purpose. For the first time in months. The window was half covered in faded signage. My father sat behind the counter with his head in his hands. My mother wasn't there. The bell rang when a customer walked in, and he barely looked up. I kept walking. No emotion, no smugness, just quiet observation. They were no longer giants in my story, just people, flawed, lost, familiar but no longer mine. And that night, when I looked out from my porch, I didn't stare at their house. I stared at the stars, at the way the wind moved the trees, at the world beyond this street, this history, this wound. I was starting to feel something I hadn't in a very long time. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the courage to imagine a life that didn't orbit around pain. A life where I could finally choose myself without needing anyone else to lose. Healing doesn't come with applause. There's no standing ovation, no camera fade. It comes slowly, quietly, on mornings when the coffee tastes normal again, on nights when you sleep without dreaming of the fight, in the way you stop checking their windows, their routines, their absence. That was how it happened for me. Not all at once, but gently, like mist lifting off a lake, revealing something underneath I'd forgotten was there, myself. Therapy had become my anchor. Every week, I unpacked memories I thought were harmless, only to realize they had shaped me in ways I never questioned. The silence at dinner, the comparison at every holiday, the way they praised my brother for breathing and punished me for trying. I learned that survival had become my talent, and success my shield, but neither were my home. I didn't want to survive anymore. I wanted to live. The store, once my fortress, became routine. It no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like work. Good work. Meaningful, yes, but no longer charged with revenge. I stopped staying late to prove anything. I let my team take over more shifts. I stopped curating the music to make it perfect. I let things breathe. And to my surprise, the store kept thriving. Maybe because I had finally stopped bleeding into every shelf. The house lost its grip too. The windows stayed open. The curtains were drawn back. I painted one of the rooms a ridiculous shade of yellow, just because I felt like it. I played music on speakers instead of headphones. I didn't flinch when I saw my mother in the yard anymore. Didn't check if my father's truck was gone before stepping out. The street didn't feel like an arena anymore. It felt like just that, a street. One of many. And then one day I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror while brushing my teeth, and something stopped me. I leaned closer, looked harder. There was a softness in my face I didn't recognize. My jaw wasn't tight. My eyes weren't guarded. I looked lighter, like someone who had put something heavy down without even noticing. And in that moment I knew. I was ready to do the one thing I had been avoiding from the beginning. Speak. Not out of revenge. Not out of desperation. Out of release. I didn't want their approval. I didn't even need closure. I just wanted to break the silence. Not to reopen the wound, but to acknowledge that it happened. That I existed. That I survived. And maybe give them the chance to be human, too. Even if they failed at it. Even if nothing changed. I wanted to speak without begging. Without shouting. Just truth on my terms. I told my therapist, and she nodded gently. You don't need to rehearse the perfect speech, she said. You don't need to control the outcome. You're not doing this for them. And she was right. I wasn't. I booked a day off from the store. No meetings. No distractions. I cleaned my house not out of anxiety, but because I wanted the space to be clean, safe, clear, like I wanted to be when I finally said the words I had carried for too long. I wrote nothing down, practiced nothing in the mirror. I just stood in the middle of my living room the next morning, staring at the front door, and then I walked across the street. Not fast, not slow, just steady. My mother answered first. Her eyes widened, and for a second, she looked like someone who'd seen a ghost. I asked if we could talk. She nodded, called my father, called my brother, and suddenly I was in the same living room where they had once erased me. They looked older, more tired. The house looked smaller, like it had shrunk with the weight of silence. I sat in the same chair I had used for every family meeting, every lecture, every scolding. But this time, I wasn't a child waiting for punishment. I was a woman choosing presence. I looked them in the eyes and said, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to speak, and I hope for once you'll listen. And they did. Not well, not perfectly, but enough. I told them about the ticket, about the day they kicked me out, about the house, the store, the nights I cried alone even while winning. My mother's face crumbled. My father stiffened. My brother looked away. And I realized right then I had done my part. I had spoken. I had stepped out of the role they gave me. Whether they changed or not was no longer my burden, because healing had happened. And I didn't need applause to know it was real. It was a cold morning, not freezing, just sharp enough to sting your lungs when you breathe deep. I chose that day on purpose. Something about the chill felt right, honest. I asked them to meet me in the dining room, the same one where they had announced decisions about my life like I wasn't in it. The table was still the same, heavy, dark wood, too big for how small we all felt. My mother was the first to arrive, tense, hands folded, lip bitten. My father followed, slow and firm, like he already knew he wouldn't like what he'd hear. My brother didn't look me in the eye. No one asked why I'd called them. They just sat, like it was a board meeting, like I was pitching something. I didn't wait for the questions. I just started talking, calmly, without anger, without guilt. I told them about the day they kicked me out, how I had already won the lottery the night before. $18 million. My mother gasped. My father's jaw tensed. My brother scoffed. I didn't pause. I told them how I left without saying a word because I knew. Even then, they wouldn't have heard me. I told them about the house, how I bought the one across the street, how I watched them from behind curtains for months, how I listened to their silence and waited for it to break, and it never did. I told them about Astor, about building it from scratch, about the workshops, the children's art programs, the people who said my store made them feel alive. I told them I succeeded, not just in business, but in choosing not to become like them. That was the real victory. My mother cried first, not loud, just quietly, tears that came fast and steady. She kept shaking her head and whispering, I didn't know. I didn't know. She said she regretted everything, that she thought she was being strong, that she thought pushing me away would make me wake up. Every day, I hoped you'd come home, she said. I just didn't know how to ask. For a moment, I believed her. For a moment, I wanted to. But then my father spoke. Cold. Measured. So you won the lottery and never told us? Never offered to help? You stood there and watched us drown while you lived in comfort. I stared at him, stunned by how quickly he turned the story into betrayal. My brother jumped in next. You were rich and you let us fall apart? That's twisted, Izzy. I looked at them, two men who had never lifted me, now blaming me for not catching them as they fell. The irony was cruel and familiar. I didn't defend myself. I didn't beg to be understood. I just sat there listening, watching. My mother still cried, but said nothing more. My father ranted. My brother accused. I realized then what I had come for. Not their forgiveness, not their understanding. I had come to see them, clearly, without hope, without the filter of longing. And what I saw was this: they hadn't changed. Not really. I had grown, and they had stayed exactly where I left them. The room felt colder now. I looked around, wondering how I ever lived under that roof and called it home. Everything was the same: the furniture, the paintings, even the smell of coffee lingering in the air. But it felt like a museum, a place full of ghosts and labels and silence. My story no longer lived there. Only the past did, and I wasn't part of it anymore. I had become something they couldn't recognize, and maybe couldn't love. When I stood to leave, my father didn't move. My brother muttered something I didn't catch. My mother reached out to touch my arm. I let her, just for a second, just enough for her to know I had heard her sorrow, but not enough to make it mine. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, "but I'm not coming back." The sentence came out clear, final, not as a threat, as a truth. I had finished the story they refused to read. Outside, the sky was still gray, the wind sharper, but I breathed easier than I had in years. My hands didn't shake. My steps were steady. I walked across the street, back to my house. My house. Closed the door behind me, and leaned against it, eyes closed. I had done it. Faced them. Spoken. Released it all. And the strangest part? There was no dramatic sense of closure. No emotional explosion. Just quiet. Clean. Real. And for the first time, I didn't wonder how they felt after I left. I didn't look back through the window. I didn't check if they were watching, because it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't their mirror. I wasn't their scapegoat. I wasn't a daughter they could silence or shape. I was Isadora, and I had finally spoken my name in a room that once pretended I didn't exist. I walked out of that house lighter, not victorious, liberated. No guilt, no anger, no hunger to be right. Just the quiet kind of peace that comes when you finally stop needing to be understood. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't rehearse my next step. I just breathed, deep and steady, like I had been holding my breath for years, and finally remembered how lungs were supposed to work. That night, I slept for 8 uninterrupted hours. No dreams, no flashbacks, just sleep. The next morning, I listed the store for sale. I didn't tell anyone. Not the staff, not the customers, not even Jessica. Not yet. I wanted to do it on my own terms, the same way I had built it. Offers came quickly. Good ones. Some from investors. Some from locals who loved the space. Everyone wanted to know why. Are you moving to a bigger location? Is this about expansion? I just smiled and said it's time. That was all. It was. The house went on the market 2 weeks later. Another quiet listing. No signs in the yard. Just a call to my realtor and a price that said I wasn't desperate. I received 3 offers in the first week. 1 above asking. I didn't rush. I walked through the rooms one last time before deciding. Touched the studio walls. Sat on the porch. Watched the street that had been both battlefield and cage. I didn't feel sad. Just done. Finished. Ready. People started noticing. Whispers in the cafe. In the bookstore. My staff looked at me differently. There were questions I didn't answer. Curiosity I didn't feed. I didn't want to send off. No speeches. No farewell cupcakes. I started leaving work earlier. Let others take the lead. Delegated slowly. I wasn't running anymore. I was letting go gently. Quietly. The way healing teaches you. Not with a bang, but with an exhale. I declined every interview request. A regional magazine wanted to do a feature. Local success story shakes up the block. I said no. A local radio host offered me a guest spot. I said no. This wasn't about legacy. It wasn't about image. I had no desire to leave behind a version of myself curated for admiration. I didn't want applause. I just wanted space. Clean, unclaimed space. Somewhere I didn't have to be someone they remembered. My mother tried to reach out again. A letter this time. Handwritten. Apologizing. Rambling. Hoping we could rebuild. I read it twice. folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond, not because I hated her, but because I had nothing left to say. Some relationships don't need revenge or redemption. They just need silence, not as punishment, but as protection. From expectations, from old patterns, from reopening doors best left closed. My father never spoke again. Neither did my brother. They didn't say goodbye, didn't acknowledge the listing signs. Maybe out of pride, maybe out of shame, maybe because they knew, deep down, that I wouldn't be looking back this time. I saw them once through the window, arguing like always, and for the first time I didn't feel anything. No ache, no rage, just distance. And that, somehow, was the truest goodbye. I packed my things in quiet phases, a few boxes a day. I donated more than I kept, sold the furniture, kept the sketchbooks, the plants, the mug Jessica gave me when the store first opened. I booked a moving truck without telling anyone where it was going. I didn't know yet, not exactly, but I had a map with circles and pins and ideas. Possibilities I had put off until now, until I felt ready to dream for myself, not in reaction but in freedom. The day I left, I didn't cry. I locked the door for the last time and stood there for a minute, listening. To nothing. To stillness. I turned, walked to the truck, and didn't look back. The house would be someone else's now. The store, too. The memories would stay here in the cracks and floorboards. But I wouldn't. I was leaving like I had arrived, quietly, unnoticed, uncelebrated, but this time on my own terms. And that, I realized as the engine started, was the greatest victory of all. Not staying, not proving, not winning louder, but walking away with peace in my chest and no one to answer to. Goodbye, not out of spite, just out of truth. The truck pulled away at dawn. The sky was soft, painted in pale orange and bruised blue. I sat in the passenger seat with my knees pulled up, hands tucked under my thighs, silent as the city disappeared behind us. When we turned the corner for the last time, I glanced into the side mirror. The street, the windows, the childhood, the silence, the rage, all shrinking in the distance. I didn't wave. I didn't cry. I just watched it fade until it was nothing but memory. The new city was smaller, quieter, no family ties, no old neighbors, just me, a list of possibilities, and enough money to never worry again. But this time, I wasn't looking for revenge disguised as success. I rented a modest apartment on a quiet street with a balcony that caught the morning light. I bought mismatched dishes from a thrift store, filled the windowsills with plants. Every corner felt like an exhale, a pause I didn't know I needed. I didn't want a grand relaunch. No headlines, no Instagram countdowns, just something honest. I opened a small space in the arts district, a combination of stationery store, workshop studio, and gallery wall for local creatives. I named it something simple, something soft. No branding that traced back to me. No logo with my initials. It wasn't about being seen this time. It was about offering others the space I had once needed and never found. People came slowly. A woman with her daughter looking for watercolor sets. A retired teacher who wanted to take up journaling. A shy teenager who stayed late sketching in the back room. I knew their names, their stories. I didn't sell them things. I gave them space. And in return, they gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Presence. No performance. No comparison. Just people being people. And me just being. The money was still there. All of it. But it no longer pulsed in my pocket like a secret weapon. It wasn't armor. It wasn't proof. It was a tool now. Quiet. Obedient. I used it to fund programs, to sponsor free classes, to pay artists fair wages. I didn't need it to protect me anymore. I had learned how to do that on my own. With boundaries. With honesty. With the grace to let go of stories that were never mine to carry. Sometimes I thought about them. My parents. My brother. Not often. Not with bitterness. Just as a memory. Like a painting you walk past in a museum Familiar, but no longer defining. I didn't check in. Didn't look up their names. Didn't follow the street on Google Maps. I didn't need to. That part of me had been folded carefully and placed on a shelf. Not erased, just finished. I wrote in the mornings now. Nothing fancy. Little reflections. Lists of things I was grateful for. I wrote down the names of people I met. Wrote letters I never sent. Sometimes I wrote to the version of me that left home with a broken suitcase and a silent scream. You made it. I'd write. Not just out of there, but into yourself. I didn't always believe it, but I wrote it anyway. Some truths need time to grow roots. One evening, a customer asked if I had always lived here. I smiled and said, in some ways, yes. In others, I just arrived. She laughed, not understanding the weight behind it. But I did. I had spent so long defining myself in reaction to pain, to rejection, to noise. But here, in this quiet place, I was no longer a response. I was becoming something whole, something unprovoked, something free. There were no more curtain stares, no more steps measured by who might be watching. I walked barefoot to the mailbox, danced while cleaning the floors, sat in cafes without scanning the room for familiar faces. I didn't need to prove I was better. I just needed to be. And somehow that was the hardest, most beautiful thing of all. To belong to no one. To own nothing. To exist without apology. I once believed that the lottery changed everything. That the money saved me. But looking back now, I know better. The fortune was just a detour. A spark. What saved me wasn't what I won, but what I released. The need to be chosen. The need to win. The need to fix what others broke in me. I found something better than approval. Better than success. I found quiet. Peace. A new address. A new self.